welcome Dr. Robert Pickard, who's going to talk to us about evolution in societies, and he's doing it in memory of Len Heath, who was a well-known Devon beekeeper. Kathy Lovegrove is going to be recording the whole speech or presentation with a view to publishing it on the DAR website after the presentation is finished, which Dr. Pickard very kindly allowed us to do. Can you please mute your microphones so that the background noise isn't recorded and doesn't spoil the overall recording? Thank you. Now, if you'd like to start, Dr. Pickard, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. All right. Does that look satisfactory for you, David?
That seems to be fine to me, yes.
Okay, then. This is just a setting up slide to remind us all that life's about balance and getting the equilibrium in life is one of the most difficult things, but it's the only way to achieve happiness. These societies you'll recognize as being making very important contributions to the world through the knowledge of bees. The Central Association, which brings science into beekeeping at a high level. And then our talk for today, the evolution of societies. I'm going to start at the beginning. So that's got to be the beginning of the universe. So that's 14 billion years ago. And if we'd stood at this place where we now exist and looked out towards the center of the known universe, we wouldn't be able to see anything. There would just be an invisible ball of energy sitting there at the center. And it would be dark because it's a black hole, and the gravitational field is so strong that no light can escape from it. People often think of the Big Bang as an act of creation of the universe and the beginning of existence. But of course, it's not the beginning of existence, because all the energy that was necessary to build the universe was already in existence. And what tends to happen is once a universe has been established by energy converting into matter, the energy is dispersed equally or uniformly throughout the universe. And then when it's completely distributed uniformly over a very long period of time, gravity can pull it all back together again in the same position. So you can then have another explosion and reiterate your universe. So our concept of the universe at the moment is that it's an oscillating system, and the ball of energy, of course, is eternal, because energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So there is an eternal propensity in existence for universes to be created by explosions. Very quickly, of course, as soon as the explosion took place, the gravitational force is overcome, and we get some of the energy particularizing into the nuclei of hydrogen atoms. So we get a whole cloud of hydrogen atoms, some helium atoms, and other smaller atoms like beryllium, also being created. But the majority of atoms created were hydrogen, and most of the atoms in a honeybee and a human being are hydrogen. Gravity exerted itself immediately after the Big Bang and pulled all the hydrogen atoms into what we now recognize as clouds that will become galaxies. You don't need many forces to build a universe. You need a huge amount of energy to begin with. Then you need a strong nuclear force to connect quarks together to produce atomic nuclei. And then you need a strong magnetic force, sorry, it's better called the strong nuclear force, to stick the quarks together. And then that of course creates matter. And then after that, you need an electromagnetic force to bring the electrons around the positively charged nuclei and allow the atoms to make connections with other atoms to produce molecules. And then, of course, you can also get the electromagnetic spectrum that was demonstrated originally by Maxwell, that we're familiar with in the form of light. So if I then wanted to travel out into our galaxy far enough to look back on it, I'd have to travel for 2.5 million years at the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles a second. And then I could look back, and this is what the Milky Way galaxy would look like, with a black hole at its center. And our solar system is at about this position in the disk. And the whole solar system is rotating around the galaxy. So our life consists of clinging to the cooling outer skin of a red-hot sphere of molten rock and iron, careering through space at 60,000 miles an hour. It's a very precarious existence. Now, the earliest forms of life were, of course, bacteria. And bacteria are the dominant form of life on the world today. And if anything happened to us, the bacteria would almost certainly survive. And we cannot survive at all. Neither can honeybees without the continuous use of bacteria, both in the environment and inside our own bodies, such as in the form of mitochondria. The first nucleated eukaryotic cells looked like this. I mean, these are a couple of cancer cells that I photographed from a neuroblastoma tumor. And I did this in about 1994. And you can see the calibration line here is 10,000th of a millimeter. So this is 10,000th of a millimeter. So it's approximately the diameter of these cancer cells. And of course, the first forms of life were organisms that were just made up of one cell, a single cell. This is a microchip. I've put the cells on, and here's the terminal. And I'm just waiting for them to crawl across and sit on this terminal so that I can interrogate their electrical characteristics on the outer membrane. So the first forms of life were all single cells. And when the single cells developed a very simple mutation which made them stick together after they'd reproduced, you then got the evolution of the multicellular organisms, such as ourselves and honeybees. So what you have in a human being and a honeybee is a supracellular living system. The cells have become divided with division of labor into special functions, such as liver cell, kidney cell, brain cell. And that's what happens when you get a supra collection of living systems. So a human being is really a supracellular organism. So the next step in the evolution of societies is to combine all your organisms together. And then you'll have a supra-organism system. And that's what we have. You'll sometimes see the term super used in the literature to describe the nature of a honeybee colony. But super isn't the right prefix to use, because super just means enhanced. So Superman has enhanced powers, but he's still a man. He's still an individual organism. In a social system like the honeybee colony, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and there is a division of labor applied for the organisms themselves within it. In honeybees, you see that as castes in the form of the queen and the worker. They're given specific tasks to do within this new structure. What you're looking at is the evolution of complexity. And the only societies we have in the world at the moment are ants, bees, wasps, termites, and the only truly social mammal we have that I know of is the mole rat, the South African mole rat. So being a society is a very rare thing. You might then ask, well, where are humans in this process? And humans are herding animals aspiring to become social, but we've not made it yet. Why do I say we haven't made it? The answer is we're not very stable. All the other societies immediately evolved a way of controlling their overall population size. We still haven't been able to do that. So human beings control their population by war, by disease, and by famine, which is pretty much an indictment of a creature that believes itself to be intelligent. Herding animals are dominated by males because in their history, the reproductive success was determined by the aggression of the male and the size of the territory that he could hold. Again, in human life, we've inherited these really rather nasty alpha males with their lust and greed for power, and they tend to work themselves into very influential positions in our population. But they are not the future of humanity. The future of humanity will lie either with the women in our society or the women and the men who have been educated to develop the qualities that we currently associate with females. And on top of that, there will be something unique in human society because there will be this close integration between humans and their machines. And we're seeing that already with mobile phones. The mobile phone is a technological ectoparasite which clamps itself onto the individual and sucks data out of them. And for elderly people, it can evolve into a symbiotic relationship. But for very young people, it can be very dangerous. And as with biological ectoparasites, some of them can become quite pathological. So having just looked at that, let's consider what are the big threats to social systems. First of all, there's asteroid strike. Now, an asteroid can strike at any moment. So I would always say to people, if you're going into a restaurant, it's a good idea to order pudding first. The asteroid strike can occur at any time, and if it does occur, it's unlikely that we'll see it coming, and it will have a dramatic effect on the surface of the Earth. The next thing that influences us and honeybees is violence and greed, and I've already referred to it. Human beings are the honeybees' #1 enemy, and they're also the #1 enemy of other human beings. So selfish people who don't care about the society as a whole are a menace, of course, and they have no empathy for ordinary people, the poor, the weak, and the innocent. And then we've got overpopulation, which I've already mentioned. Unless we manage to find a way of regulating the world's population, we will run out of energy, we will run out of food, and we will run out of drinking water. So whenever we can get the opportunity, we have to develop a culture where the overall population is regulated. And as you know, ants, bees, wasps, termites, and mole rats all do this by only allowing a small number of individuals, sometimes only one individual, to actually produce the offspring. And then the workers, the rest of the individuals, regulate that production of offspring in relation to resources. And then lastly, we've got disease, which people always think about, but disease is not as critical to the future of the planet as overpopulation is. And we're waiting now for our next pandemic, and bird flu has always been in the frame. Pandemics are going to become much more common because our population is so large and so interactive on a global scale. So I think it's important at this point just to remind ourselves that nature is not benign. Nature is all about competition for survival. And if you don't have the necessary capability to survive, then you will not survive. So nature is, unfortunately, a very hard taskmaster, and is certainly not benign towards living things in general. When I was a student, I was very lucky to go to Charles Darwin's home in Kent, Down House. And here, in one of my nostalgic photographs from student days, you can see me sitting in the chair in which Darwin actually wrote on the origin of species by means of natural selection. And the stick I'm holding is the one that Darwin used to walk around his favorite garden walk, the sand walk. What we learn from Darwin is that it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor is it the most intelligent. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change. The honeybee evolved from a parasitic wasp, and this wasp used to lay its eggs inside caterpillars. And it was very important that as the larva grew inside the caterpillar, it didn't kill the living host that it was feeding on. And so those parasitic wasps had a genetic sequence which didn't allow the midgut to connect to the hindgut until the end of the larval development. That was really important for parasitic wasps so that they didn't kill off their food supply by defecating inside the host. That's been immensely useful to honeybees because it means that the honeybee larva is exactly the same and doesn't connect the midgut to the hindgut until the end of its development. So that means it doesn't contaminate the special food that's been placed inside the cell. So it's tremendous benefit. If we look back to the Cretaceous period, that's 124 million years ago, as I said, we're living on a molten sphere of rock and iron. So the little bits of continent that are floating on top are like slag floating on top of a furnace of molten metal. And these bits of slag float around. So you can see in the Cretaceous, India was floating off the east coast of Africa. And probably some fundamental bee species got onto India here and floated northwards. And that probably helped to generate the variety of bees that we have in Asia compared with Europe. We've got these mountains and we've got oceans to restrict the genetic pool, and that will change the evolutionary direction of particular species. So here we've got the ancestral population of Apis mellifera, and the first migratory route is down to the Cape to Apis mellifera capensis. Capensis is a very unusual bee because if you take the queen out, the oldest worker will adopt the role of the queen and she'll start producing queen pheromones and she'll start laying eggs. And unlike with our own honeybee, the eggs that she lays will be parthenogenically female. So from the eggs that capensis lay, the colony can build and produce a new queen. So that's a real advantage to the Capensis colony, you would think. But in practice, it hasn't been an advantage. And there are only a small number of colonies of Capensis left in South Africa. And its method of producing females parthenogenically has been a disadvantage to it because it's reduced the hybridization and variety of the progeny and therefore reduced its adaptability as a population to the next generation of change. Apis mellifera sahariensis goes across North Africa into Iberica and then northwards into the United Kingdom. The Palestinian group from Lamarckii goes across to Syriaca and then comes around the top to produce Ligustica in Italy and Carnica in the Balkans. And then across the top here, we've got some ancient groups of bees, notably the stingless bees, going all the way down to South America. And on the archipelago running down through Indonesia, Australia is about to start floating upwards to join the bottom of that system. We've got some very dramatic speciation. We have a bee, Apis koschevnikovi there on an island. So you get some very rare species of Apis on that almost forgotten and isolated part of the world. And then periodically, of course, we've had the Ice Age coming down, squeezing the humans and the bees in Europe into Spain, Italy, and the Balkans. And each time the Ice Age developed, it forced more dramatic speciation processes on those three groups of European bees. So they've developed now their own culture and modifications of their own language. Here's some stingless bees in the Yucatan Peninsula, and I've asked Jorge to put his hand over the hive so that you could get an idea of size. And in the stingless bees, you've got this mixture of bumblebee characteristics and wasp characteristics, because it's an older linkage to the ancestor of the bees. So here you've got pots of honey, which are rather like a bumblebee colony. And here you've got the brood, which is horizontally built, like a wasp colony. This is Melipona beechii, and it has a simple society of usually about 80 to 100 bees, nothing like the 50,000 bees that will make up an Apis mellifera colony. But the bee, Melipona beechii, is very similar. Don't think that because it's stingless, it can't defend itself, because although it is stingless, it will, as far as we're concerned, it will identify us as enemies if we open the colony, and it will jump on your arm and pull out the hairs on your arm, one hair at a time, which soon becomes quite excruciating. Here now in Central Europe, we see Apis mellifera evolving, and you can get male and female bees going back to the Eocene, which is 40 million years ago. But you don't see worker bees until much later. So the society that we know so well in Apis mellifera isn't well formed until about 26 million years ago, when we look at fossils from the Miocene period. And here you can see this bee has got pollen baskets on its hind legs, so it was definitely a worker. Now, as soon as you see sexual polymorphism appearing, your herding animal or your isolated partnership animal is turning into a society, because sexual polymorphism is being used to create the division of labor that increases the efficiency of a social creature. 26 million years in the Miocene, West Germany. Human fossils, of course, only go back 7 million years. So this is why we are really the beginners in the process of socialization. The bees are 40 million years ahead of us, and they've solved most of the problems that are required to be solved by a society. The ancient human being was a carnivore, and you can see these very carnivorous teeth here. And of course, even 7 million years ago, the brain capsule is still not fully developed at all. So this is a very different creature to the one that we think of as a human being today. Interestingly, we can look at the fossil record to get an idea of when human beings began to feel empathy for one another. And that was about 130,000 years ago, because that's where we get the fossil history beginning for the study of graves. Before this time, when human beings died, you could find the bones wherever they died. They weren't collected together. After this period, it's clear that human beings had evolved empathy for one another. And when someone died, they collected the bones together to form mounds inside caves, and they added to the skeleton terms of endearment or objects of endearment, or objects that were important in the person's life. So there is a real change 130,000 years ago. So what we consider to be the nature of our humanity, our feelings for other people, they are really very, very recent in evolutionary time. Here we are now from the Bee Research Unit in Cardiff, visiting Brother Adam at Buckfast Abbey. And you can see that the consequences of racial variation developing across the world as the gene pools become isolated by mountains and by oceans. And at Cardiff, we had students from 50 different countries around the world. And they've all gone on now to be professors in their own country. Muhsin in Turkey, Muhsin Dogaroglu, and Robert Paxton here, who became an expert in Nozema and is now professor at the University of Martin Luther at Halle. Brother Adam himself, of course, who used to enjoy meeting the students, and we learned a lot from him at Buckfast. Chisato from Japan was one of my favorite students because she was so polite, and she always kept her laboratory bench extremely tidy. And John Free and I were walking down Museum Avenue in Cardiff one day, and Chisato was walking a couple of paces behind us. So I stopped. I was getting a crick in my neck talking to her. So I turned around and I said to her, surely in today's world, in Tokyo, Chisato, surely the girls don't walk behind the men. And she toddled a bit further forwards till she was between John and myself. And then she turned to us and she said, but you are so old. And she bowed very respectfully to us both. So John and I had quite a laugh at that. And he said, okay, carry on then. Here's something that many people in science would regard one of the epitome achievements of human beings. Here we've got an Apollo 12 astronaut on the surface of the moon, and I was lucky in being able to examine the return vehicle from Apollo 12, and with its black crusted ceramic tiles on the outside. And I remember looking at the machinery inside and how simple and primitive it was. I don't know how these men had the courage to go up in the Apollo space program. Each instrument was only held in place by 2 screws that they were toggle screws that you could flip open very quickly if you needed it to work on the electronics inside. The whole thing was incredibly primitive when you consider something like Star Trek with all its wonderful, sleek machinery. This is a very interesting slide because this is a human being who has traveled through space with fire and thunder in a gleaming chariot, and he's walking on a planet of the gods. So, in terms of the ancient civilizations of Mexico and Peru, of China, and Egypt and Greece and Rome, Italy itself. What he's done is he's actually realized the prophecy of those ancient civilizations. He is man become God. He has actually done what they foresaw in the future possibilities of humanity. Well, here's the queen bee now, and as I've said, she's not an ordinary female because she doesn't go out and forage and feed herself. She's a caste. She's a modified form of the honeybee genome. And what's remarkable is that the honeybee genome, the same genome, can produce 3 different forms: the drone, the queen, and the worker. They're 3 different forms produced from the same genome by changing the food that is given to the larvae at specified times. And if we understood that mechanism, it would be wonderfully useful in developing new ways of treating disease in the human condition, because it's all about epigenetics. It's all about how you use molecules outside the genome to influence the expression of the genome. And that's a big area of research for the immediate future. What's very special about the honeybee is that she didn't copy the evolutionary process of the termites. In the termites, when the society started to form, the sexual polymorphism produced a range of females, and one would be a nurse, one would be a gardener, one would be a soldier, and they'd be modified to do those particular jobs in their society. What the honeybees have done is that they've set up a system where the worker goes through a progression of occupations according to its age. And that's the advantage of that, is it's extremely flexible. It means that if you only have old bees in the hive, but you have a sudden need to produce wax, then those bees can regress their physiology and redevelop their wax glands and then produce wax. So the honeybee worker system, instead of using sexual polymorphism to produce 20 different workers, has created this age-related occupational development that allows the bee much more flexibility, or the colony much more flexibility than it would have if it had completed the line of evolution that the termites followed. Now, human beings are bringing their society together using microelectronics, because we don't have time to evolve a pheromonal control system to control one another's behavior. So we started with mobile phones and computers, and the whole world is being driven towards one set of values, one structure of science, and gradually, of course, one expects there will be a drive towards the same culture on a global scale. It's not that anyone is choosing to do this particularly. It's a biological phenomenon that is occurring. The microelectronics are just a vehicle for increasing the complexity of human life. There is a danger that because it's happening so quickly, we may not be able to adapt quickly enough to the new society that's coming around the corner. It's particularly difficult to adapt to the interface between humans and microelectronics, the cyborg interface. And yet, many people today have artificial limbs, artificial components like pacemakers built into their hearts. Many people, millions of people, in fact, around the world are already integrating their bodies with man-made or human-made machinery in an effort to survive. So that's a new phenomenon, and it'll be interesting to see how far it goes. Luckily, we've got our government to look after us, and here's George W. Bush, and he's looking through his binoculars, and you can see he hasn't taken the covers off the binoculars. but he doesn't tell people around him that he can't see anything. He pretends that he can see something, because politics is not the science of government, it's the art of government. And the art requires that the show must go on. So he keeps talking. So we have a real problem with our politics. Firstly, it tends to be occupied by alpha males whose time has gone. They are left over from the days of cavemen. And that's a major problem for us. There is a major problem with truth. Many politicians today don't think it's important to tell the truth, whereas, of course, scientists are trained to tell the truth, and they are immediately discredited if they try to pretend that something is happening and they have no evidence to show that it's happening. So one of our big problems in the evolution of our society will be how we can be sure that policy making is evidence-based and that communications are truthful. Because if we can't get that right, our society will be greatly handicapped. This is one of those things that that human beings have done, which is really shocking. I took this photograph in the Atomic Bomb Museum in Hiroshima, where I was on one particular day. And this is the atomic bomb going off in Hiroshima. And just to the right of the photograph in the museum, there was the original instruction for the bomber pilot. And the instructions said, fly towards Hiroshima, and if the sky is clear, drop the bomb. But if the sky is not clear, fly on to the next designated target. And I stood there in that museum for about 15 minutes, thinking to myself how amazing it was, the poignancy, that this bomb was only dropped on Hiroshima so that because there was a clear sunny morning, and that was required because the reconnaissance plane that took this photograph was flying a few minutes behind the bomber. So Hiroshima only came into its position in history because the people woke up that morning to a sunny day. I think that is one of the most poignant things that Japanese people must think about on a regular basis. Of course, because we've managed to produce nuclear power, we've got nuclear power stations. But we have a problem with nuclear power stations because the poisonous waste that they produce is toxic to humans for 300,000 years. It's also toxic to honeybees for the same length of time. So we're reminded again that human beings have a huge responsibility to preserve the planet. And at the moment, we're not taking our responsibility seriously. And we're treating the planet as if it was a playground just intended for us. You can't become a society unless you evolve incredibly sophisticated and complicated means of communication. Honeybees have fantastic communication. They use chemistry in pheromones. They use antennal tapping for a one-to-one personal conversation. They use sound for a whole range of things, both airborne sound and sound transmitted through a substrate. And then, of course, they have these wonderful dances, the use of body language, which earned Professor Carl von Frisch the Nobel Prize when he actually first described this in his book on the dances of bees. So here you've got a bee communicating to the other bees where it's been foraging. But in this case, the bee is a robot, and the robot has been constructed by Axel Mikkelsen from the University of Odense in Denmark. And this robot is under computer control, but it's going to dance in such a way that it tells these bees to go at 90 degrees to the bearing of the sun and for a specified distance. The distance is being specified by this component of the figure of 8 dance, and the mileage that has to be covered is present in several different indicators. And so the bee performs the dance, the waggle, and then it comes back around and repeats, and then it comes back around and repeats. So it's called a figure of 8 dance, and it has some amazing properties. So let's watch the robot communicating to the bees. The narrator on this piece of video is Stephen Gould from the University of Princeton. And when the model was first built by Axel, who is an engineer by profession, he didn't put a reward system in. And so the bees got fed up and stung the robot, because they need to get a reward when they've attended the dance, because a sample of nectar contains the fragrance of the flower that the bee has visited. And that helps the bee to find the source of the food when the dance has taken it to the correct location.
Pause is for the delivery of a sample of the nectar which the dancer is advertising, which is what a real bee does. When the first model failed to deliver, the bees saw through this and stung it. This model was accepted. The bees fly to the location it indicates, so further studies of the dance are now possible.
Okay. Now, that alone is quite an amazing thing, the ability for a species to convert a navigational experience into navigational instruction for others. Only honeybees and humans can do that. Chimpanzees, whales, dogs can't do that. If they find something interesting, they have to lead another individual to it manually. They can't perform something that is similar to the bee dance and communicate the navigational bearing symbolically. On top of that, the bee's cognitive ability is quite remarkable. And this is an experiment that von Frisch performed, where he put the hive and the food on opposite sides of a mountain that the bees were unable to fly over. And he saw the bees coming out, going west and north and east. And when they arrived at the food platform, he painted them with a little blue dot. And he told the students at the hive, the observation hive, to record what dance the bees did when they got back. For example, did the bees do 3 different dances to indicate the 3 different bearings that they were having to fly on? And they were astounded by the result, because the bees actually calculated the position of the food geographically relative to the hive and relative to the sun at that time of day. And they communicated the true bearing of the food across a mountain over which they couldn't fly. And when the recruits came out, who had also been painted a different color, some of the recruits went the other way around the mountain to get to the food, which is quite remarkable. So the bee has the ability to perform computations. It has a mind's eye in which it represents the environment that it's living in a very similar way to the way in which we can create in our minds a geographical map. In human evolution, I've already said that all the societies that we have at the moment are female dominated. So it's interesting to look at the brains of boys and girls and see what's happening as their brains are evolving. And here we've got a group of females and a group of males, and they've been given the same language problem. And you can see that one group is using just the left side of the brain to analyze the language problem, but the other group is using both sides. So which is male and which is female? The male are very definitely one-sided when it comes to language, because the opposite side of their brain is analyzing three-dimensional space. But in the females, there is less use now of the three-dimensional space function, and they've occupied it with language analysis. So already a lot of female
contextualizing the whole of species across the world.
Yes.
It's quite incredible lecture, really.
So here you can see the female is already using both sides of her brain to analyze a language problem, and she is effectively being predetermined to have more influence in the future human societies, because her knowledge of language and the use of language will become more and more sophisticated as she employs more brain cells. The downside of this is it's quite difficult for a woman who's extremely good at language and is using both sides of her brain. It's quite difficult for her to read a map upside down, because she doesn't have she sacrificed the three-dimensional visual analysis that the males brought down from the trees after we were living in the trees. And this wouldn't have happened had it not been for the fact that because our ancestors were living in the trees before they were living in caves, both the sides of the brain here were used for three-dimensional visual analysis. And we've rapidly been able to redeploy those cells now for language. If you get Beecraft, you'll have seen in the June issue this little device for testing the hygienic behavior of bees, which is very important in social systems. So here, Eggert has made this little array of needles that you can push into the brood comb, and then you mark where you've pushed it in. And here you can see it's made little holes in the caps, and the needles will have done some damage to the front of the head of the bees. And then you can look after 6 hours, and you see that the bees have removed some of the larvae or pupae, as they found them dead. And after 24 hours, if these bees have a very good sense of hygiene, they'll remove all of those cells because they're damaged. Now, this is a really useful thing because bees are always doing this. They're always checking, removing the capping to check if there's something wrong underneath. And bees that do a lot of this are the bees that are particularly capable of living with varroa, because when they detect some smell that shouldn't be there because of the actions of the varroa in the cells, then of course those bees will uncap the cells and will remove all the contents, including the young varroa, the immature varroa. So this is a very useful test for looking at which bees you could be breeding from if you wanted to develop a natural resistance to varroa. But of course, it's very much a socially acquired capability. Bees share 60% of their genes with humans, which I was very surprised when I saw the printout of the bee genome. Cows share 80%, which is why cows, sheep, and pigs make particularly good sources of food for humans, because most of the things that they have to produce for themselves are needed by humans. But 60% of the genes in a honeybee are shared with humans because we had a common ancestor, which was a metamerically segmented worm. If we look at sex determination now between humans and bees, on the left you've got the humans, and we know that the female will have 2 X chromosomes and the male will have a Y chromosome. Now, I've got with me here the complete human genome, which was the first copy produced and published in Nature. And if I show you the X chromosome that the girls have 2 of, there, you see it's a huge chromosome, absolutely stuffed with genes. And now if I show you the Y chromosome, you'll be surprised how short it is. The Y chromosome doesn't have any genes that are important for human survival. The Y chromosome only has about 20 significant genes that are designed to convert a female embryo into a male embryo, because the default condition for all human embryos is to begin their lives as female. If you have a husband who doesn't believe this, you should take his shirt off, point to the nipples on his chest, and say, just exactly what are you going to do with these, George? So basically, in human beings, the embryo is female, it's set up as a female, and then if the Y chromosome is present, it will convert the female embryo into a male embryo. The development will then go as you might expect. The interesting thing compared with bees is that, of course, it means that a human male is haploid for one of its chromosomes, and that's the X chromosome. And that probably has a significant effect on a male life, because the female's got 2 chances of getting good genes on her X chromosomes, but the males have only got 1 chance. And being haploid creates problems. It means that if there's any strange mutation on the X chromosome, it's going to show in the adult. And in honeybees, we see the haploid male is constantly showing genetic mutations that are recessive and could be overcome by a dominant gene if the males had more than 1. So you see white eye, for example, in a drone honeybee, which I've never seen in a female. So there we've got the females, and there we've got the males. So what's happening with the bees? Now, the bees don't have an X and a Y chromosome. What the bees have is a sex-determining gene. And the form of a gene, the molecular form of a gene, is called its allele. For example, we have a gene for eye color. And if the allele is a molecule for producing brown eyes, we call it the brown allele. Or it could be an allele for producing blue eyes, and we call it the blue allele. Now, in bees, there may be as many as over 100 different sex-determining alleles. And in bees, if the 2 alleles are different, the embryo will always develop into a female. But if there's only 1 allele present, as there is in a normal drone, then the development will be to produce a male. If the queen mates with a closely related drone, she may end up with 2 of the same sex-determining alleles in her egg, a fertilized egg, in which case this would then become a diploid drone, because the sex determination is based on whether you have 2 different alleles or 1 allele. Now, the complication increases because in the Dominican Republic, we have a population of people that have a mutation which stops the Y chromosome working for 12 years. So those children that are carrying a Y chromosome and they have this mutation, they grow and develop as a female all the way up to 12 years of age. And then when the mutation stops working, the Y chromosome has its effect and converts the female that's carrying that Y chromosome into a normal male. Her organs will change, she'll produce sperm, and she'll be able to father children when she switches between her ancestral female condition and her male condition. So in caveman times, you were either a male or a female, and gender was very simple. If you were a nice, gentle male, you are not likely to get your genes through to the next generation because you'd be eaten by the psychopath in the big cave next door. All your wives would be stolen by the psychopath in the big cave next door, and your children will be eaten by him. So life was very difficult for any male in caveman times who was not a thoroughly nasty piece of work. Similarly with the females, if the female was very assertive but didn't have any muscle power to back that up, she would have very little chance of surviving against an alpha male. Now everyone can reproduce and everyone can produce offspring. And I call this middle group that's appearing very rapidly the entomorphs. The entomorphs are only appearing now because the herding selection of the aggressive male has been diminished, and now all types of human being have a relatively equal chance of surviving. And it's on this population of entomorphs that normally one would expect the worker population to be drawn if we were going to evolve into a society of the type that other animals have evolved into. But it may all be very different for us because of the integration with machines. Here's a lineup of the basic gender differences between the alpha female on the left and the alpha male on the right. The middle group here ranges between the two, and the middle group tend to be infertile and they tend not to reproduce. Even the ones towards the extremes tend not to reproduce. The only ones that are really committed to reproduction in a big way are, of course, the alpha male and the alpha female. The alpha male is the most highly modified female human being. So all of these different genders are really can be classified as modifications of the fundamental female embryo. And the question is, will any of these become worker humans for the future society, or will it be extremely different in the case of human beings because of the merging with computers? Well, the nice thing for all these different gender types is that they're all capable of loving and being loved. And love is the fundamentally greatest achievement of human beings. We can apply love to another person, to an animal, to a subject. I've loved biology all my life, and I don't think really about anything else but biology on a day-to-day basis. You can love a principle like freedom or self-determination. And the wonderful thing about love is that it drives achievement. And there are so many people in the past who've achieved what they've achieved because they loved what they were doing. And that's the thing that we need to hang on to when we're talking about people. People don't make decisions based on their intelligence. Most of the decisions that people make are based on their feelings. And that's why Shakespeare is still relevant after 400 years of history, because we may have changed many, many things, but we haven't changed the rationale for our decision making, which is entirely based on emotions and on subconscious machinery that our conscious brain does not have access to in our brains. So here I am now sitting on the headland at the Bay of Naples, and I'm looking out of the Isle of Capri, and I'm thinking to myself, what a wonderful world we live in. The universe does not recognize love. It does not recognize natural justice or social conscience. But the amazing thing is that we do. Shakespeare had a line in Hamlet which said, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." So it's up to us, if we want to give meaning to these human values in our own window of space and time, we only need to make it so. Thank you.
Will you be taking questions?
Yes, I can do.
Okay, if anyone's got a question, then perhaps they'd like to ask it, and we'll see what you can say to them. You'll need to unmute yourselves if you're muted. Not happening. Kathy, can you unmute
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I think people are possibly a little stunned.
It's a sunny day. What did our sociologist think? Was there anything new there? Esther?
It was interesting, yeah.
I suspect that when you were studying sociology, it's very human-centered.
Yeah.
And didn't see society as part of a biological evolutionary process.
No. Yeah.
But of course, as a sociologist, the more you understand about the biology of people and can put their behavior into context, you'll find the more insight you'll have into human responses. And the biggest one is the fact that Greek philosophy used to say that if you know yourself, you will know everyone else. And now we know that the brain is so limited that only small parts of it are accessible to the conscious thinking component of a human being. And most of the decisions we make have been driven by our subconscious.
Yeah.
A great subject, though. I wish you every success, Esther.
Thank you.
Hello, Kathy.
Yes,
Could I ask a question, please?
yes, and I think Graham's ready next in line.
Sorry, I should have put my hand up. Robert, I've just commented. I thought that was a really excellent presentation, and thank you so much for taking the time on a Sunday afternoon to do it. Is there a way that we can find out more information about your work and how to read more or read again, probably, because there was such a lot in it?
Well, there are videos on the internet, on YouTube.
Thank you.
Of a whole range of subjects. And there are pamphlets produced by the Central Association of Beekeepers, which you can get. If you're a member, you get them free. And the membership is only about £15 a year. And you get the most up-to-date scientific commentary on honeybees. I am just a little bit more unusual because I always mix honeybee biology in with human biology because I find the two side by side very interesting.
Yes, thank you. Is there a link for that? Do you have a link to the?
But if you just type my name into YouTube, you'll get plenty of links.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
The wonders of modern technology. It's unbelievable.
It's not stuck to my ear, though.
That's a wise move.
Do you think that human populations will survive?
Who's speaking? I'm not sure.
That's raking.
Yes.
All right. It's going to be difficult because the speed of change is huge, and our ability to, if there's one thing people don't like, it's change. Women in particular like novelty. Men hate novelty because when a man has spent a lifetime as a surrogate caveman and built his territory, what he most likes to do when he gets to 40 or 50 is just sit on it. Whereas women have this amazing search for novelty and renewal. And that's going to be needed in the new society. There's no doubt about it. I don't think we can survive for very long if we don't change the way in which we behave. Because we're going to poison ourselves. We're going to have a lack of food. We're going to poison the environment. and we're going to find it difficult to even get drinking. And then put that to one side and look at the people who are controlling countries around the world, who are alpha males, and little change from the psychopath who lived in the big cave. Little change. And they have no empathy for the weak and the poor and the innocent. And I can't see any way getting rid of them quickly enough for more sensible voices to prevail. So we do have a major problem. And I've spoken to many big industrialists about the future of humankind, and none of them involve in their planning a very long period. They talk in terms of hundreds of years or thousands of years, which is quite shocking when you think honeybees have lived for 40 million years.
Interesting. Thank you.
Right. Graham.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Question about consciousness. On your last lecture that you gave to us in Devon, I think you alluded to the fact that you thought consciousness might possibly be caused or come about by the electrical impulses and the chemical impulses reacting, a bit like magnetism. I've been asked to write an article about ethics and morals for insects, particularly bees, which is quite daunting because we're looking also at the future of feeding ourselves with insect protein.
Yeah.
And the fact that they are, different stages to an insect life and so on. And, what is consciousness? For us as beekeepers, we would probably say that bees do have some form of consciousness because they communicate, they dance, they sing, they're able to find food, share information. Would you like to elaborate, please?
I think the bee, like all animals, has the elements of the different emotions that we have in some cases refined to the nth degree. If you grab a honeybee's leg with a pair of forceps, you'll see the behavior that she goes through of trying to escape has exactly like the behavior of a human being whose leg has been trapped with a pair of forceps. If you look more subtly at the behaviors, look at scenting behavior. When a bee has lost its way and gets back to the hive, it doesn't just rush in looking after itself. It stops, it beats its wings, which in this case we call scenting. It beats its wings, and then it exposes the Nasonov gland at the tip of the abdomen to drive the scent of the Nasonov gland outwards like a beacon for all the other bees that will have lost their way. So that's extremely altruistic behavior. And it's proportional to the length of frustration that the bee suffers. If I frustrate a worker bee when she comes back to the hive for a long period, when she finds the hive entrance, she actually Nasonov scents for a longer period in proportion to her frustration, which is fascinating to actually experiment with. So the bee will have its level of consciousness and awareness. Take the case of a bee that's bribing its way into a hive to which it doesn't belong. The worker bee arrives on the landing platform and is frisked by the guard bee. But being conscious of her position relative to this guard bee, she tucks her tail down to show that she's not aggressive. She then strokes her tongue like this, which we call stropping. She strokes her tongue like this, and this is an appeasement reaction. And if this works properly with the guard bee will then allow her to enter. And sometimes she will give a bit of a bribe to the guard bee by regurgitating some nectar for the guard bee. But once she starts to strop, she nearly always gets in to a hive that she doesn't belong to. So these are all very sort of human-like behaviors. They show a high level of consciousness of the situation. If you make a slow motion film of a bee defending the entrance when a hornet is approaching, like Vespa velutina, the bee can clearly see the hornet at a significant distance, even 6 inches away. Even 6 inches away, you will see the defending bee will open her jaws and she'll release isopentyl acetate from her sting gland area to alarm the rest of the hive. And as the wasp moves from side to side, you'll see the bee moves from side to side with its head. There's an incredible amount of understanding going on in recognition and preparation for the next stage of the encounter that you wouldn't really credit a bee with if you didn't see it with your own eyes. In fundamental answer to your question, there is no such thing as a mental disease being a disease of the air. All mental illness is a result of imbalance between the physics and chemistry of the brain. And a normal functioning brain has just the right balance of the physics and the chemistry. And I suspect that all human thoughts and activities are the result of very specifically balanced physics and chemistry. And we should never think of mental illness as being in some way different to other types of illness. I think it's all physics and chemistry.
Do you think bees can feel pain?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I don't have any doubt about that.
Mm.
It's necessary for an organism to feel pain because it has to identify threats to its existence. We call it pain, but pain is a fascinating thing. If a person can create concept of pain from a stimulus that's actually very mild, and they often need special medical treatment, those individuals, because pain is a relative perception. It's not, we don't have very specific cells for generating and detecting pain. We have groups of cells that do other things that can also generate the perception of pain. It's not as specific as visual perception or auditory perception. But if you prod virtually any animal, however complex it is, you'll get a reaction which shows that it's aware of the fact that its survival is being threatened.
I take the view that each creature, if you like, is a specialist in its own field. The fact that we don't react the same way or understand it, is a blindness on our behalf. And I think it's probably better from a moral point of view to, for example, give insects the same moral standing, perhaps as we would say a farm animal.
I think that's a really interesting point. The fundamental thing is that we've always seemed to have accepted in our legal system that human beings have the right to defend themselves and that human beings have the right to exploit other species if, in doing so, that is the only way they can maintain their survival. There is a defense in law which goes under the heading of cuncta prius tentanda, all things having first been tried. And it was first used in the defense of two seamen who were lost at sea with a cabin boy who died in the boat. And the only way the two men could survive was to eat part of the cabin boy who was dead. And when they came back to the United Kingdom, their first trial they had was life in prison, was death. And then the defense of cuncta prius tentanda, all things having first been tried, was presented, and their death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment because they tried everything they could. And so in the end, they had to do something that most people would find horrendous. So it is extremely difficult to draw a solid line around an ethic. Extremely difficult.
Oh, thank you
Can
very
I
much.
ask a question?
Is it Alan?
Yes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think is the likely outcome of the very rapidly developing artificial intelligence? Do you think it's a force for good or a force for evil?
We have a major problem in our population because the people that develop the science develop it in the hope that it will benefit mankind. But how science is applied is not determined by the scientists. It's determined by the politicians. So when we choose our politicians, we would be very wise to try and find some representation of science in Parliament, because politicians generally make their decisions based on mantra and ideology. They don't make their decisions based on evidence. It's extremely difficult to get our political system to respond to evidence. So in the case of artificial intelligence, it is such a powerful capability that if it's applied incorrectly, it will cause immense damage. If it's applied correctly, as the scientists intended it originally, it could be a good thing. And I asked a professor of artificial intelligence, would he buy a self-driving car? And although he believes in the benefit of artificial intelligence, he said, no way, because he just thought the unpredictability of driving a car was enormous. But so I think it is a problem, artificial intelligence. If it's not controlled very carefully, it will create lots of misinformation, lots of political malingering, and lots of commercial malingering to encourage people to buy things through what is essentially a result of untruths being perpetuated by the artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence programs can recognize which lies you will accept and which lies you won't accept. So it can manipulate even the lies, not just the data.
Wow. I wonder if we could take, say, one more question, unless Alan's got something he wants to come back on.
Thank you.
Graham?
Just a last question. What's the future for the bees?
Well, the bees will outlive the humans. I'm pretty certain of that. When Varroa was threatening to come to the UK, I wrote an article for Thorns called Varroa the Amber Light, where I explained that Varroa was going to be a major problem, but making the clear statement that I was absolutely confident that the bees would gradually adapt as a population to be able to live with the Varroa, because they've done that generation after generation for millions of years. They've adapted to the threats. And Varroa has been living with Indonesian bees for 15 million years. So I'm quite confident that bees will continue to keep adapting to whatever we throw at them, even though we make their lives incredibly difficult. They've got a fantastic set of biological capabilities. For example, I measured the pollution on flowers in Cardiff city centre and all the nasty things that were on the flowers. And then I measured the level of those pollutants in the honey of the bees that were going to those flowers. And I couldn't find hardly any trace at all of the contaminants that were being deposited on the flowers by the urban livestock, because the bees have such an incredible system for purifying the honey and removing all sorts of things that would otherwise be dangerous. So in that spirit, I'm confident that the creatures that have the longest life expectancy are the bacteria and some of the single-celled organisms. But in multicellular organisms, I think the bees have a better chance of surviving than the humans at the present time. One of the problems with medicine is it keeps alive genomes that nature would not. And if we allow those genomes to then replicate, you inherently build up a weakness in the population in terms of survival. And natural selection then requests a repayment of the debt at some point in the future. And that's what happens when pandemics hit us. We have to repay the debt for the quality of the medical care that we've had for previous generations.
Well, that's been a really fascinating talk. Thank you so much. On behalf of all the DARG membership, and all the other people who dialed in. I think that's been really nice. Just to point people listening towards the internet and your name if they want to look at any of your published stuff online. And this particular recording will go on the DARG website at some point when Graham can get round to putting it up for us. But thank you very much on behalf of all of the DARG membership. It's been really
Thank you
nice.
very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just interject that the DARG do have a library and we do have the CAP leaflets if anybody's interested and wants to borrow them, because Glyn has donated his collection to us.
Oh, that's nice. Well, Len Heath will be very proud of you all. He was a great supporter of DARG in his day when he was professor at the University of Plymouth.
Have you seen our website?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
I have.
good. Okay. So could you send us a picture of you to put on there, please?
I think I've sent one to Kathy.
Have you?
Oh,
Okay.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope
Thank
to
you very
see
much,
again.
Kathy, for organising this. Very kind of you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye then.
Bye-bye.